So a big namaste to Josh and Shea, our guest on the this episode of Learning Beyond School. So how's it going? How are you?
I am doing very well. How are you today?
I'm fine today. I'm fine today. So can I call you Josh?
Absolutely, please do.
So it's a really honor for me to have you on the show, to have someone who can speak on such topic and guide the youth about such things. So, Josh, I want to tell you that in India, the condition about the sex education and the pornology is really bad. Like the parents don't they just neglect it, and our education system also don't pay much attention to it.
Yeah.
So the condition is really bad, and I'm feeling honored to have you on the show to guide us on this topic. And
Now,
so
why do you think that is? Do you think it's because it's taboo and it's embarrassing and they don't want to talk about it? Why do you think it is in India?
it's main because of the taboo. People are not comfortable talking about this. So and like whenever a child asks his or her parents about such topics, parents such just neglect such issues, and the child gathers such information through his or her surrounding or from the Google, and inject the incorrect knowledge about such topics, and get trapped in these topics, and again get addicted to such topics.
Well, I do
So
know that India has some of the highest rates of pornography
yeah.
use in the world after the
Yep,
US.
yep, yep. After the it's our second country
Yep.
who is getting like the porn traffic. So it's really good to have you and
Thank
someone
you
who can
very
talk about
much.
it.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
So Josh, like first of all, I would like to begin with about your own story, your background, where are you from, and what you do, and what is your story about this addiction?
Yeah, well, I am from the US. I am from a state called Maine. For those people who are trying to figure that out, it's about 6 hours north of New York City if you're driving. And anybody who may know Boston, it's about 2 hours north of that. Um, my story is much like just about any other porn addict. I have a background of sexual and mental abuse that came at the hands of a babysitter when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And I developed certain coping mechanisms and certain survival skills that, for a 6-year-old boy might be okay, but when they don't develop further, they're not okay for a 26-year-old man or a 36-year-old man. And what happened was when I was around 12 years old, I had an older cousin who showed me some pornography magazines. And I knew the moment that I saw it that I was hooked. There was just something very different about how it made me feel than anything else that I'd ever seen before. I don't even think it had to do with the people on the page or what those people were doing. It was just something washed over me that made me feel okay. And the only other thing that I can describe that made me feel that way was about 2 years later when I got drunk for the first time. So from about the age of 13, 14, straight up through my mid 30s, I used both alcohol and pornography as my two go to addictions. When, if you look over those 20 years, it doesn't matter if I was in school or at a job, it doesn't matter if I had no girlfriend, I had a girlfriend, or I was married. Ultimately, when things got stressful, when things got tough, I went and I used pornography and also alcohol, but I mainly used pornography as a coping mechanism, as a way to kind of escape it all, as a way to make myself feel better in a way that people who are just looking for a quick orgasm, not the same thing at all. That's one of the things that people really don't recognize is that people who are addicted to pornography use it for a very different reason than those who are just going online to
Mhm.
feel to pleasure themselves. And it's like somebody who is able to go and have one beer versus somebody who's able to go who can't do that and they have to have 10 beers. It's a different thing. Your brain tells you that you need this to survive. Your brain tells you this is the only thing that's going to make you feel okay. And for more than 20 years I was absolutely addicted to pornography.
That's really really inspiring story, Josh, and I do believe that the young listeners who are gonna listen this episode will get something valuable out of it. So
I certainly hope
yes, yes, you
so
can.
because the challenge with young people is that you probably don't remember a world before the internet. And
Yes.
I was about your age when the internet first started reaching American homes and started spreading all over the place. So when I became addicted, it was with magazines or it was videotapes, and they were not always easy to get my hands on. And today, we give every 13-year-old kid a smartphone, and that's the
Mm,
greatest pornography computer that's ever been used. And
mm,
I truly believe that if my parents in the 1980s had told me that pornography, could lead to addiction, that it was bad, I never used any drugs. There were a lot of things that you can get addicted to. I never got addicted to. And I think a lot of that had to do with the education coming from my parents. But in the 1980s, nobody knew that pornography was an addiction. And again, it was one of those things that if you were somebody my age, 13, 14, 15, you had to go find it. And it was not easy. Where today, every kid with a phone has access to pornography, or anybody who has a VPN in some of the countries that make it a
mm.
little more challenging, has easy access to it. Um, so it's one of those things where we absolutely need education these days. We need, as adults, as teachers, as doctors, just as society, we need to understand that even if we morally are opposed to pornography, which a lot of people are, you still have to teach about it, because simply
Mm,
being morally opposed, you can't stick your head in the sand. You can't pretend it's not out there. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean that you can't teach about it, because you can. And you don't have to describe what's on the page. You don't have to do any of that
mm,
stuff. You just have to you have to let kids know in an age appropriate way that this stuff can have harmful effects. When they're 18 or 21 or whatever the
mm.
age is where you might live, they can make their own decisions, just like they do with drinking or smoking cigarettes or any of that stuff. But we need to teach our children when they are children, they need to stay away from pornography.
I do agree with you with every single word of yours. I do believe that being a student, open and healthy conversation about such issues is very, very important. So, Josh, if I say to you that like everything has its own pros and cons. So, like, do you agree with me with this?
For the most part, yeah, I do. I would agree with you, and it's a lot of it is the individual user and how
Mm,
they are created. I aside, I when I go out and I talk to schools or libraries, that kind of stuff, I don't bring an anti-pornography message, because my personal views of pornography, I don't want them to cloud anybody else. I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to use morals. I'm not going to say any of that, because that doesn't help the conversation, I don't think. And the other thing is, we're never going to ban pornography as a society.
mm,
You go to the Middle East and you will find caves and, that people lived in hundreds of thousands of years ago, and they drew pornography on the walls. If you go
mm,
into, one of your great museums and you look at, artwork from Egypt and, ancient times, you're going to find pottery where they painted essentially pornography on the side. And what we have
mm,
to realize is that pornography will always be here, and pornography is is a tool for sexuality. And
mm,
healthy sexuality is a great thing. Healthy sexuality makes life that much better. But it's when
mm,
people start to get involved in behaviors that are
mm,
unhealthy for their sexuality that pornography becomes a problem. So I know there are people who look at it, they can look at it once a week, once a month. It's not a big deal, just like that guy who
mm,
has one beer and walks away from it. but
Mm,
there are now anywhere between 20 and 30% of men under 30 are
mm.
addicted to pornography. So there's quite a few of them out there who can't use it in a healthy way. And I'd like to believe that most of these guys didn't know that it could be an addiction, didn't know that it could be
Mm,
unhealthy, and now they're
mm.
suffering the effects of it. So what we need to do, and we learned what the internet means to pornography addiction over the last 20 years. And now we need to take the lessons we've learned and start using them on the younger people. And hopefully, we will see some of these statistics when it comes to addiction drop.
So it totally depends upon the individual how he or she is using that particular thing.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is that most people who aren't addicts need to understand that the
Mm,
addict, whether it's food or gambling or drinking or it doesn't, video games, it doesn't really matter,
mm,
because the addict is, they are being hit with chemicals in their brain that give them pleasure, that give them a high in a way that you
mm,
are not feeling just having your one beer
mm.
or playing video games for 30 minutes. Addicts have an entirely
Yes.
different thing going on in their brain. It's hitting their dopamine, it's hitting their serotonin, their oxytocin. You know, that you have these chemicals in what are the pleasure centers of your brains, and you just keep flooding them and you keep flooding them. And eventually you need more and more. And that's how you get to the point that no
Mm,
longer are you playing video games for an hour. You're playing them for 4 hours to get that same
yes.
high. Or if you go to a casino, maybe you bet 100 on a hand of cards, and you do that for a while, but it doesn't feel as the same anymore, so you have to bet
Mm,
300 or 500. With addiction, you have to keep ramping things up to feel that same high, and it doesn't matter what it is, because your brain is just telling you, I need this. Of course, from addiction to addiction, there are different, if you're a smoker, you're going to get lung cancer much easier than someone who is a gambling addict, where they may go
mm,
bankrupt. So
mm.
there are different symptoms, but largely addiction is the same across the board for what goes on in the mind and in the chemicals.
Yes. So what do you think? What's wrong in watching ad pornography? What's wrong in it?
Well, I mean, on the addictive end of things, like any addiction, it can ruin your life. It can take over. When you're an addict, you start to replace your addiction for the normal things in your life. You don't hang out with friends as much. You don't make good decisions
Mm,
with money. You become estranged from your family. On a completely personal level with pornography, uh, ultimately, pornography does not. I put it this way. I have read dozens and dozens, if not well over 100 studies about pornography.
mm,
All of them, if it could be about marriage, it could be about being a kid, it could be about how it affects your work. Every study I've read, pornography never contributes good. It only contributes
mm.
negative. I
Yes.
have never had
Every time.
anybody present me with a study that says, here, pornography is good. There is no
Mm,
scientific proof that pornography is good at this point, but there is a ton of proof that it's not. And I'll tell you, this might be
mm,
interesting for people your age, especially. The last presentation that I did before the coronavirus hit the world
mm,
was at the end of last year at a college. It was at their health center. A group of women invited me to talk to their sexuality group, and they were
mm,
between the ages of 18 and 20, 21. And one of them shared something with me that I never had heard of, and then all the other ones started to agree. And she said that as a 19-year-old woman, she did not want to have sex with a virgin man. And I was like, really? And a lot of the other girls in the room started agreeing with her. And I asked, so
mm,
what's the problem? And she said that
mm,
all of these guys today are raised on pornography. That's the only sex they know. So if they're a virgin, the only sex they've seen is what they've seen on their computer screens or their telephone screens. depictions. And
Hmm.
even regular normal mainstream pornography these days shows men
Hmm.
being very aggressive, shows men being
Hmm.
nasty to women, shows men being
Nasty.
demeaning,
Hmm.
aggressive, physical, hand on the throat, that kind of stuff. And these
Hmm.
girls said that this is what virgin men think is normal for sexuality and is normal for having sex for
Hmm.
the first time. And these girls don't want to have to train these guys and teach these guys this isn't the
Hmm.
way it is, because they are taking all of their cues and they're learning all of their moves from pornography, and
Hmm.
they don't want any part of that. So I found that to be very telling, that this has nothing to do with addiction. These are normal guys watching porn.
Hmm. Hmm.
These are just normal college women, and they don't want to be with these normal guys, not even addicts, just normal guys, because they've grown up on pornography. And I've got to think that if in this room of 15 women, if 12 of them felt this way, that's probably true all
Hmm.
across, America, all across the world. And there
World.
and there are
Hmm.
all and there are probably a lot of guys who are 15, 18, 20 years old who have not had sex yet, who are looking forward to it, but have the
Hmm.
wrong message from pornography in their
Message.
head. And that's the
Hmm.
kind of thing where you say, why is pornography bad? Well, we don't talk about this, but it's making a generation of women not want to be with men.
Hmm.
And we don't really, and we
Hmm.
don't talk about this.
Hmm.
We don't see this in studies. That's why we have to have these discussions,
Hmm.
because I wasn't expecting to learn that when I went to go make my
Hmm.
presentation.
Hmm.
And these women shared this with me, and it was the most fascinating thing I'd heard in a long time, because I'm not 20
Hmm.
years old anymore. I'm not in that, well, frame of mind with my lifestyle now
Hmm.
that I'm
Hmm. Hmm.
older. But it was important to learn that about the youth culture, that women are really turned off to guys who have grown up on pornography, because they don't understand what healthy
Hmm.
sexuality is supposed to be.
Yes. Josh, let me tell you this one thing, that India is one of the country which has highest number of rape,
Yeah.
and porn is one of the main reason why it has happened, because the individual inject the incorrect knowledge about sex, having sex with the other gender, and he uses the same thing with other women. So you said very very correctly that like the other gender don't know what is a good sexuality, what is meant by having a good sex, and yes.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And that's one of those things that, yes, you don't need to be addicted to pornography for it to still have a
Hmm.
negative effect on your life.
Hmm.
That's one of those things. That's why I think that we need to teach our kids. We don't want them to be raised on this, because it gives them false
Hmm. Hmm.
ideas in
Hmm.
their head, which, yeah, addiction is horrible. I can speak to that. But just getting those wrong ideas, and having to almost be retrained and retaught. Well, if they don't get these bad ideas in their head in the first place, then they don't have to
Hmm.
unlearn them when they're 20 years old, and realize that every piece of porn they've ever seen is fiction. And
Hmm.
that's the thing. A lot of people look at pornography and think they're watching nonfiction. They think they're watching like a
Hmm.
documentary or a nature show. And it's like,
Documentary. Hmm.
pornography movies are fiction. They are completely
Fiction.
fabricated. These are characters, these are actors or actresses. The moment that you set
Hmm.
up a camera, even if it's you and your girlfriend, you're acting differently, and it
Hmm.
becomes a fiction. So people need to recognize that whenever they go on to
Hmm.
look at pornography, they are not looking at a real thing. They are looking at fiction.
Real thing. Hmm. And that's the story they believe in, and then they try the same in their real life also,
Right.
which
Well, and if you look at, a lot, the two things that there was a study not too long ago, the two things that guys between 18 and
hmm.
30 said that they wanted to experience with a girlfriend or their wife sometime in their life was to have anal sex and was to have a threesome.
Hmm.
And if you look at statistics of that really happening, that almost never happens. In real life, it almost
Hmm.
never happens. Less
Never
than one out
happened.
of five women will allow a guy to do that, and less than one
Hmm.
in eight women will allow a guy to have a three-way. So you watch pornography, you think that's what happens all the time, but that's not real life.
Hmm.
That sets up unrealistic expectations. It sets up a situation where your partner may wonder why you're wanting this stuff that she has no interest in.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what is healthy sexuality for you as an individual will not be the same thing as what's healthy sexuality for a couple. You know, if
Hmm.
you think one thing is perfectly fine and your partner thinks it's not okay, well, guess what? It's not okay in your combined sexuality.
It's
It
not okay.
needs to be okay
Hmm.
with both people. And that goes both ways. If she wants to do something and you're saying, "Oh no, I would never want to do that," she should respect you and
Hmm.
not allow that to happen.
Hmm.
And that's whether you're guy and girls, two guys, any relationship you're talking about, you have to respect the other person's boundaries with their sexuality.
Boundary.
Otherwise, it's unhealthy.
It's unhealthy. Do agree with you, Josh. Like I have one question regarding your
Yeah.
personal story. So I saw your previous interviews, and in that interviews you said that after having some loss in your business, you get more addicted to alcohol and
Oh,
pornology.
absolutely, absolutely, I did, and I was a very well-known person where I live here in my town.
Hmm.
I was the owner and operator of a
Hmm.
of a giant magazine. I created a
Hmm.
film festival that people from all over the world came to. I was also a local politician. I was very, very well known,
Hmm.
and I hit a point where my magazine started failing business-wise, and it was just too much for me. And I decided I take medication for bipolar disorder and I have for about
Hmm.
20 years. I decided, and this was
Hmm.
7, 8 years ago now, before I got healthy. Back in early 2013, I decided to pull myself off of my medication to
Hmm.
try to save my company. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, what happened was instead of saving my company, because I thought I'd be creative, I thought I'd stay awake longer, I'd have more energy.
Hmm.
Well, all of these things that I thought would happen because I'd get into a manic state didn't happen. I got into a depressive
Hmm.
state. So I started drinking more and
Hmm.
more. I started looking at more and more porn. And like we talked about earlier, where you
Hmm.
need to increase it and increase it and increase it, what my
Hmm.
beer drinking turned into tequila drinking. Instead of drinking just at night, I was
Hmm.
drinking 3, 4 times a day. Uh, my pornography,
Hmm.
I started to look at. I used to only look at that at night. I started to look at it in the morning,
Hmm.
and then at night, not only did I just look at porn, I started to go into chat rooms and talk to women one
Hmm.
on one, kind of like a Zoom call, one on one. And I, after a few days, figured out how to convince these women to start taking off their clothes. And I
Hmm.
just liked manipulating them. I liked controlling them. That's why I used porn. Porn was a control thing for
Hmm.
me. And I did this with women online. It was horrible. I mean, I was catfishing them. I was telling them whatever I needed.
Hmm.
I was looking up information about them while they were talking to me. And eventually, in
Hmm.
early 2014, the police showed up at my house and they
Hmm.
said that one of the women that I talked to was a teenage girl. And I didn't know she
Hmm.
was at the time, but that's no excuse. That's that you and I both know that there are 16-year-old girls who look 26 and 26-year-old women who
Hmm.
look 16. So
Hmm.
I can't use that as an
16.
excuse. It was
Hmm.
a bad point in my life, and I was clearly addicted, and the addiction was not letting me think straight, but I don't use that as an excuse
Hmm.
because I knew I had mental health
Hmm.
issues and I ignored my
Hmm.
medication. And in ignoring my medication, I set this thing in motion, and which ended up with me being in these chat rooms late at night and making very bad
Hmm.
decisions, not just for my healthy sexuality or unhealthy, but
Hmm.
I was a married man and that was horrible. That to me, that's cheating.
Hmm.
And I did this, and then a few months later, like I said, I did this in November 2013, and then in March of 2014, the police showed up at my door and said, "We think that you talked to a teenager online," and I was like,
Hmm.
"Oh no." come on in. And we sat down and talked about it, and they laid out their evidence. And it was, you're
mm,
absolutely correct. Yeah, I can't lie to you.
mm,
I did this. It was clearly a mistake. But and then they said that they recognized I wasn't, looking for a child. I was just looking for any woman to talk to.
mm,
But I wasn't
mm,
showing good judgment because I was impaired. But
mm,
a judge doesn't want to hear that. That's not correct. And I was just so
mm,
sick at the time that when I met my lawyer the next day after I was arrested, I met my lawyer the next day, and he said, don't think so much about the legal stuff. That'll take place. We'll go to
mm,
court, we'll plead, we'll do all this other stuff. You need to get yourself healthy. So
mm,
about a week after I was arrested, I went off to California, and I went
mm,
to an inpatient rehab facility for alcohol. I was there for 10 weeks and did a lot of therapy. And at that point, I still didn't know pornography addiction was a thing. It wasn't until the
mm,
end of my time in that rehab facility that my caseworker had me meet with a certified sex addiction therapist who was off
mm,
campus. And I met with him, and he made me realize that it wasn't just alcohol. I had a porn problem, and my porn problem
mm,
dated all the way back even before the alcohol. And it was a direct result
mm.
of the abuse that I suffered at the hands of that babysitter
Abuse.
all those years ago. So
Mm,
once I learned this, it was very powerful. I went through several months of therapy back home here. And then I decided to go to inpatient rehab for sex and porn addiction as well. So I did that for about
mm,
7 weeks, learned so much about myself, learned how I became the way I
mm,
was, dealt with that trauma that I'd held inside for so long. I was such an angry person and such a
mm,
broken, hurt person deep inside. And I learned how to heal that. And I learned how to basically heal that 7-year-old boy that I
mm,
still was. And then,
mm,
all said and done, 2 years later, I had to go before the judge finally. And she was very impressed with the work that I did. But she said very, very frankly and honestly, you cannot do what you did and get away with it, no matter how much you fix yourself. And
mm,
I said, you're absolutely right. So she sentenced me to 6 months. So I went to jail for
mm,
6 months. And when I was in jail, a lot of the people knew who I was because I was kind of a local celebrity.
mm,
And a lot of these
mm,
guys that I was in jail with, they would start to come up to me once they got my trust and ask questions about their pornography use or ask questions about how much they had sex with people. And it was interesting
mm,
because I recognized these guys were there because of drug violations or because they beat their wives or because they were burglars and robbers, but they
mm,
weren't nearly as embarrassed about their crime as they were about their unhealthy sexual behavior. And it was when I was in
mm,
excuse me, when I was in jail, I decided, okay, I'm going to write a book about this because
mm,
from the very rich people I met in rehab who were doctors and lawyers to the very poor people I met in jail who,
mm,
hadn't had a job in years, there was unhealthy
mm,
sexuality, especially around pornography, for everybody. And I realized there is no stereotypical porn addict. You can't say, a porn
mm,
addict is a 19-year-old guy who has never kissed a girl. A
mm,
porn addict is a
mm,
horny 44-year-old guy who can't hold a job. There is no stereotypical porn addict. That's what I learned. And I
mm,
realized that message needed to get out there. So, having been a journalist for so much of my life, I decided I would start
mm, mm.
writing books, but I wouldn't
Book.
write very complicated academic books like all the studies that are out there
Mm,
because
mm,
I like to read
mm,
those, but most people don't read academic studies. So I
mm,
decided to
mm,
create books that anybody could understand. And so I
mm,
put my first book out there. And what surprised me more than anything was how many partners of porn addicts, how many wives and girlfriends, and even mothers or sisters or brothers or fathers, how many people who had porn addicts close to them in life contacted me and wanted to
mm,
learn how to help their loved
mm,
one. And that's when I said to myself, okay, this could become a bigger deal. And I have a very special story because I went through it.
Hmm.
But I also have done all the
Hmm.
research and I know the medical side of things.
Hmm.
And I don't have a problem telling my story. I don't have a problem going on shows like this and talking about porn or what I did or sexuality. And a lot of people, it's still taboo. So I decided, I'm
Hmm.
going to I did this horrible thing. You know, what I did to
Hmm.
that girl is terrible. It's not cool that I did it to adult
Hmm.
women either, but it's
Hmm.
terrible what I did, and I want to
Hmm.
give something back. And maybe if I
Hmm.
go on shows like yours, if I write my books, if
Hmm.
I can reach other people, maybe I will help create less victims in this world. And if I can
Hmm.
create less victims than I actually had, maybe overall it was a good thing. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
not on this earth to be a politician. Maybe I'm not on this earth to run a
Hmm.
magazine. Maybe I'm on this earth to help people understand this
Hmm.
very misunderstood addiction.
Hmm. Actually, like for me, it's also about making a small difference. Even if it is a small, making a difference is an important thing. And with your own story, you are already creating it. So, Josh, I want to ask you that in this whole process, what are the signs you observed in yourself being a porn addict? Like, if someone is porn addict, then what are the signs his or her body shows that prove that he or she is
Well,
addicted
what
to
they're
that
going to
porn?
notice first is a craving. It's your body somewhat
Hmm.
telling you need something. Consider like being
Hmm.
thirsty. You know when you're thirsty.
Hmm.
Your brain tells you you're thirsty.
Hmm.
Uh, Consider your cell phone. If your cell phone is 10 feet away from you and you hear it ding or you hear it chime, you know someone's trying to reach you and you want to get up and go look and see
Hmm.
what that
Hmm.
is. Your mind is telling you to
Hmm.
go do this thing. Well, that's really what you'll start to first notice is your mind is telling you to go do this thing. And then what starts to happen is it doesn't even feel like you have control of your mind anymore. And you start
Hmm.
prioritizing it differently. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe your friends say that they're going to go out tonight, but you want to stay home and look at porn.
Hmm.
Or, if somebody knows that you're using porn and they bring it up and you feel like very defensive, that's usually a sign
Hmm.
something's up. Like if you came to me and said, "You're a gambling addict," I'd just look at you and say, "No, no, I'm
Hmm.
not." Because I'm not. But if someone
Hmm.
confronts you with porn addiction and you have a real reaction, that may be a red flag
Hmm. Hmm.
something's
Hmm.
up. So, and it's one of those things that it slowly escalates over time. It's not overnight. It takes, like I
Hmm.
said, I was a porn addict for
Overnight.
probably 22 years. And then
Hmm.
that last year or two was when it got really critical.
Hmm.
And that can happen at any point. And that's the thing that I want people who are listening here, especially the younger people, to understand. You may be
Hmm.
hearing my story and saying, "Oh, I would never do that. I could never be as bad as him."
Hmm.
But I'll tell you, from 12 years old to 35 years old, I was a everyday porn user, but I kept a good job. I built a good life. I was a functional addict.
Hmm.
And I would
Hmm.
say that I never could have got to that place. But there I was, getting arrested,
Hmm.
getting put into the back of a police car because my addiction took over. My addiction made me, it changed my mind so much that I
Hmm.
didn't recognize right from wrong. I didn't
Hmm.
recognize the consequences of my actions. And
Hmm.
if that can happen to me, that can happen to anybody. And that's
True.
what people
Hmm.
need to recognize. You, as an addict, are not special. You are not the chosen one. You are
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
one who addiction will just skirt around. Because let's be honest, when it comes to addiction, it only ends in one of a few ways. You lose your family, you lose your friends, you
Hmm.
lose your job, you get into
Hmm. Hmm.
financial
Hmm. Hmm.
problems, you get into legal problems, or you die. That's how
All
addiction
right.
ends, in one of those six
Hmm.
ways. Or you go into recovery and you get help. So if anybody out there is saying, "I'm not
Hmm.
as bad as this guy," well, thank God you're not as bad as this guy yet. Get yourself some help before you
Hmm.
get to where I was. And that's
Before you.
that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons I'm out there, is that nobody should ever have to get to the point they were where I was if they've heard me speak. I never heard anybody like myself
Hmm.
talk before I ended up getting into that trouble and I ended up needing to go and get
Hmm. Hmm.
recovery.
Hmm.
I like to think, had I heard anybody talk about this, the way that I talk about it now, it might have
Hmm.
stopped me. And I think I don't want some parents out there to have to deal with what my parents dealt
Hmm.
with. I don't want anybody's kids
Hmm.
out
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
to have to deal with what my kids dealt with. You know, it's
Hmm.
shameful, it's embarrassing, it hurts your heart, it makes you sad, it makes you
Hmm.
angry, it completely changes your life forever. And I just think that if people recognize they have this problem, they may get help sooner than later. And I know it's
Hmm.
embarrassing. I know it's taboo. I know it talks,
Hmm.
pornography hits those places in the back of our mind where we don't want to talk
Hmm.
about the little things that we might like or might
Hmm. Hmm.
might be
Hmm.
curious about. We
Yes.
don't want to
Yes.
talk about that stuff, but we don't have to talk about it. We just have to talk about the
Hmm.
substance that causes it, and that's
Substance.
pornography.
Hmm.
We don't have to talk about what's on the page,
Hmm.
what's on the screen. We just have
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
talk
Hmm.
about the fact it's out there as an idea and what to do now that we know the effects of it, now that we know how much the internet is actually
Hmm.
infecting the younger generation.
Hmm. It is really infecting the younger generation a lot. George, do you think is there any right age to access pornography, or we should completely avoid it? Because youth in India, especially, they believe that once they become 18 plus, they can access to it because now they have the right.
I think I
So,
look at it this way. I don't want to take anybody's freedoms away because I don't want them to take my freedoms away.
hmm,
I live not
hmm,
far
hmm,
from a
hmm,
casino, and my wife and I like to go there maybe
hmm,
twice a year. We have dinner, and then we spend a tiny little bit of money on some of the games. But neither of us are addicted. We have some fun and we leave. So it's not a big deal. It's not a big
hmm,
deal at all. I don't want somebody because they're a gambling addict to say that I can't go to a casino.
hmm,
Just the same way that I don't, if you enjoy watching pornography, if you can do it in a way that isn't
hmm,
unhealthy, then I'm not going to take that
hmm,
freedom
hmm,
away
hmm,
from you. I would say, though, that much like drinking or smoking or gambling or
hmm,
anything else, you do anything to excess and it can be bad for you.
hmm,
So when you turn 18, I don't think that should be a green light to suddenly smoke 5 packs of
hmm,
cigarettes a day and drink 50 beers and go spend $1,000
hmm,
at the casino. Hopefully by 18, you've begun to understand some maturity. You've begun to understand a little bit what it means to be an
hmm,
adult. And at that age, I think 18 is fine. I know there will still be addicts. There's always going to be alcoholics. There's
hmm,
always going to be drug addicts.
hmm,
There's always going to be porn
hmm,
addicts. But right now, in schools, there is no education about porn addiction,
hmm.
but you have an
Education.
education about
Yep.
drugs and alcohol. And I
Hmm,
think
hmm,
that
hmm.
we need to start making it part of that. I don't think that
Part of
the
that.
anti-pornography speech is part of the birds and the bees. It's not part of a sex talk with your kid. It's part
Hmm,
of a here's dangerous stuff. Stay away from it. It's part of the be care. Don't touch
hmm,
cigarettes. Don't touch alcohol. Don't touch
huh,
pornography. When you're out of my house, you can do all of that stuff later on, and you can make your own decisions later on once you've learned more about
hmm.
it. But
What's your
for right now, I
learn?
don't want you looking at that stuff. And that message will hit
Hmm,
a lot of children the way it should.
hmm, hmm,
It's
hmm,
does it's not a requirement to radically change your parenting style, and
hmm,
you just have to make it so it's not scary, make it so you're not judging, make it so you're not embarrassing the kid, and just
hmm,
say, be careful,
hmm,
this can have some harmful effects on you. And I understand you're
hmm,
curious about it. I understand you're curious about alcohol. It's just a
hmm,
12-year-old or 14-year-old shouldn't be
hmm,
using
hmm,
this. And if you decide you want to use it
hmm,
later on, that's up to you. And when you're 18, if you want to look at pornography, by all means, hopefully by that point, you haven't developed any traits that make you an addict. Because
hmm,
the thing we have to understand about addiction is a symptom of a bigger problem. Addiction is not the problem
hmm,
itself. Addiction is almost always a
hmm,
symptom of a bigger problem. For porn addicts, 90 to 94% of porn addicts, depending on the study you look at, have unresolved
hmm,
childhood trauma from abuse. 90 to 94%. So somewhere between 18 and 19 out of 20 people all have abuse in
Hmm.
their background, all have trauma they haven't worked through. So if somebody is a porn addict, you don't become a porn addict just because you look at porn too much. You become an addict
Hmm.
because you're
Hmm.
trying to
Hmm.
solve you're trying to deal with these other problems. And that was the key
Hmm.
for me
Hmm.
when I
Hmm.
went into therapy, when I went into rehab. It wasn't just a matter of here's how you stay away from porn, here's how you stay away from
Hmm.
alcohol.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
how did you
Hmm.
become the person who started using? How
Person.
did you become the person who thought that this was an acceptable escape? How did you become a person who everybody else can use this the
Hmm.
right way, but you can't? How did you become that person? And
Hmm.
when you discover how you became that person, you look at your family, you look at your
Hmm.
experiences, you look at your thoughts and your the way you see the world, you
Hmm.
figure it out and you put the pieces together. And
Hmm.
when you put the
Together.
pieces together and figure out how you became the person you did, it's much easier to let your addictions go. Much
It's
easier.
much easier. So again, to the down point, it's all come to the proper study of any subject and then taking decisions. So Josh, I want to ask you that, like, before you were addict and now, do you think that, like, it is also, you have also written this in your first book, how pornology affected your relationship? So what is the difference you saw in yourself when you were porn addict and after you have recovered
Uh,
from it?
as with just about every addict of anything I've ever talked with, when you're addicted,
Hmm.
you will say and do whatever you need to get your substance. I would lie to
Hmm.
anybody. I not necessarily
Hmm.
steal because I didn't need to. I made enough money, but
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
addicts are doctors of manipulation. Addicts know how to make you think
Hmm.
that you're crazy. It's called gaslighting.
Hmm.
Addicts know how to flip situations. They know how to lie. They know how to hide things. They know how to
Hmm.
kind of walk in the shadows because they've had so long to practice. It's one of these things where I was a porn addict for
Hmm.
13 years before I met my wife. I had already figured out how to hide it from everybody at that point. I had to hide it from my
Hmm.
parents
Hmm.
when I lived with them,
Hmm.
had to hide it from college roommates,
Hmm.
had to hide it from girlfriends and roommates in my apartments. So when I finally got married, I was a master at hiding it. I was a master at
Hmm.
pretending it wasn't a problem. And like most people, she wasn't looking for it. You don't date somebody and immediately think, I wonder if they're
Hmm.
addicted to pornography. You don't think that when you start dating
Hmm.
somebody. So it's one of those things where it was very easy to hide and lie and manipulate, but that all takes energy. That all is just a dark part of your
Hmm.
soul. That's all negative
Hmm.
energy. And in removing all of that, in unburdening myself not just from the addictions,
Hmm.
but from that kind of behavior, not manipulating people, not lying to
Hmm.
people. Removing all of this,
Hmm.
I feel lighter. I feel healthier. I don't feel like I'm always waiting for somebody to find me out or learn the truth because I don't
Hmm.
hide anything anymore. And it's a great feeling.
Hmm.
It, uh, I've heard people say this before, but it's true. Always tell the truth because if you always tell the truth, you don't have to
Hmm.
remember your
Hmm.
lies. And
Yeah.
that was
Hmm.
the
Do
case that
agree
I
with
was
it.
having to remember my lies. I was having to remember, I was
Hmm.
having to manage this life and present myself to the world in a way that wasn't true. When I got busted
Hmm.
by the police, it was on the TV news that
Hmm.
night. It was the front page of the
Hmm.
newspaper the next day. Everybody learned about it in my community, and I have a feeling most people had trouble believing it because I didn't seem like that type of
Hmm.
guy. Again, going back to the
Hmm. Hmm.
stereotypical addict, I wasn't that type of guy that they
Hmm.
thought. I had, a wife and kids, and I
Hmm.
hid it so well that it shocked many, many,
Hmm.
many people. But addicts are the best liars and the best manipulators in the world. And when you're
Hmm.
finally able to get that off your shoulders, all that negative energy, all that weight, all that
Hmm.
deception,
Hmm. Hmm.
it feels so much better. It feels so much better to not live a life of
Hmm.
lies.
Hmm. If we keep this relationship factors aside, what do you think, to what extent pornography affect the human being, like emotionally or mentally or physically? Have you faced something like this?
Well, I mean, physically, it changes your brain chemistry. It
Hmm.
makes you an addict, and that's the thing people need to recognize is that
Hmm.
yes, it's an addiction of choice, in that the very first time you did decide to use it, much like cigarettes, much like alcohol.
Hmm.
But we know that addiction is a brain disease. It's
Hmm.
not
Brain
something you
disease.
can just. Most people can't go cold turkey. Most people can't walk away from it because it changes your brain's chemistry. So
Hmm.
physically, that's what happens. Now, emotionally, you look at addicts and they are sad people, they are angry people, they're hurt people
Hmm.
because again, most of them are dealing with trauma that came from their youth that they never
Hmm.
worked through. So really what you're seeing are adult people who have these sad little children trapped inside of them. And they're
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
trying to
Hmm.
make their way through the world without being noticed, without,
Hmm.
raising flags. They're just trying to cope and deal with the world. And
Hmm.
they're doing it as this sad child trapped in an adult's
Hmm.
body. Um, and that's really what the thing is. You cannot recognize, or you cannot realize your potential when
Hmm.
you are an addict, whether it's porn or any other
Hmm.
kind.
Hmm.
You can't recognize your potential as a human. I look
Hmm.
back and I think, boy, I mean, I didn't waste, but I could have done so much more with my 20s.
Hmm.
I could have done so much more with my early 30s had I
Hmm.
only got help before
Hmm.
2014. I look at my last 7 years of being sober and being healthy, and I think, I've done so much. I've done so much good.
Hmm.
My relationships with my wife and my children are better
Hmm.
than they ever have been. I live this clean, healthier life now. I mean, the virus has made me add a few
Hmm.
pounds, but I've got such a happier, fuller life now than I
Hmm.
ever had before. And that's one of the things I really try to push to people. I have a coaching, advising side of
Hmm.
things, and I always try to push to people, it's better on the other side. Most addicts are
Hmm.
scared to get rid of this one thing they know makes them feel better. And you think about that. Of
Hmm.
everything in the world, what's their one favorite thing? Well, for an addict, it's their addiction. And
Addiction.
you take away that one thing, they don't know how they're
Hmm.
gonna how they're gonna live their lives.
Hmm.
And I'm proof that you can get rid of this one thing, or
Hmm.
my two things, alcohol and porn. You can get rid of
Porn.
these. You can get rid of these things, and you can
Hmm.
live a much more full, happy, productive life. It's hard to believe when you're stuck in the
Hmm.
addiction,
Hmm.
but I'm proof that you absolutely
Hmm.
can, and you will. People who are, go to a 12-step meeting, or find people online who are in recovery.
Hmm.
Talk to them if you're an addict of any kind,
Hmm.
and you're going to learn that yes, you can recover and you
Hmm.
can have a better life. You can absolutely have a better life without your addiction. It just takes work. You have to be dedicated to
Hmm.
it. But again, once you put that work in, life is so much
Hmm.
better now.
Seriously, you are a living example of like any addiction can be overcome if we have this dedication. So, like, I do believe this, that whosoever is addicted to some or other thing, that person use that addiction as an escape to the problem he or she is going through.
Yeah, I
So,
think you're right, and I look at it as myself. I used alcohol as the escape. The effect
hmm.
alcohol had on me was very numbing. I didn't think
Hmm.
about things. But with pornography, my addiction was about power and control, because that babysitter took power and control away from me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you look at my entire life, I've always been a
Hmm.
control freak. I started my own businesses so I could be the boss. I didn't want
Huh.
anybody else telling me
Hmm.
what to do. And but think about pornography. You go to a website, no picture of a beautiful
Hmm.
woman,
Hmm.
or a guy, or people having sex. None of them are going to say no to you. You have the
Hmm. Hmm.
control.
Hmm.
If I
You
want
have the
if I
control.
want to see a woman with blonde hair, I push a button. If I want to see a woman with black hair, I push a button. If I want
Hmm.
an Asian woman or a Mexican woman,
Hmm. Hmm.
or
Hmm.
I can push a button and I get whatever I want. And nobody
Hmm.
on that page ever says no to me. They never tell
Hmm.
me
Hmm. Hmm.
that I have to take out the trash, or they never tell me that, I'm not good enough. They just
Mm-hmm.
do what I want. And that's really,
What I
and I
want.
didn't realize that for a long time until I was in recovery for a while. But
Hmm.
my porn addiction, that addiction was about control. And it was about me fooling myself into thinking I had more control in
Hmm.
my life than I did.
And that's where also very young people trapped also, like they read articles on websites that why porn is good and what are the benefits you will get after, like after watching porn and all this kind of stuff. And they also, and that's why they started watching, and they don't know that when they have become addict to that particular thing.
Exactly.
So
And that's very dangerous because
hmm,
you can talk to anybody who's an addict of anything. You don't
hmm,
realize you're an addict until
you
it's
don't
too
realize.
late.
Yes.
There's never that day
So
where you wake up and go, well, I guess I'm an addict today.
hmm,
It's just all of a sudden you're addicted to this thing and you can't get away from it.
hmm. So, Josh, if you notice one thing very common in any addiction, and that is the lust or pleasure that the person get after being addict. So, what do you think that students should know about how to get rid of this lust or pleasure we get that motivate us to take a particular action again and again?
Well, I think what people need to recognize is that that pleasure feeling you get, those are just
Hmm.
chemicals in your mind. That's all that
Hmm.
there are
Hmm.
chemicals in your body. The way blood runs through your body, the way water is in your
Hmm.
body, these are just chemicals in your brain that are giving you this
Hmm.
sensation. There are other ways to get that.
Hmm.
Go
Hmm.
hiking, play sports, exercise,
Hmm.
get involved in some major
Hmm. Hmm.
activities. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
find
Hmm.
other things out there that stimulate your brain, that make you feel good. If you start to feel like you're heading towards an addiction or just a bad habit, and this is true with, just habits. If you are forming a bad
Hmm.
habit,
Habits.
habits form because there's a reward. Now, what is the
Hmm.
reward from looking at porn? Well, maybe it's, it makes you feel good physically, or maybe, you think about being with a girl, or whatever it is. Well, you can get those other feelings doing other things.
Hmm.
Go join a cooking class that women are in and you can talk to them. Go, go and do activities that are social. Whatever it is you need to
Hmm.
do, whatever it is you is going to, you can do plenty of other things that will make you feel good, that will get those same pleasure chemicals going. You can't just stick on that one thing, because what happens with addiction is you start to destroy those parts of your brain.
Hmm.
So a lot of things that I would have found pleasurable, I didn't find pleasurable because my
Hmm.
addictions had fried that part of my brain so much. So before, especially young people, before
Hmm.
you get deep into a bad habit, before you get
Hmm.
too deep into addiction, you can pull back so you don't cause the problems in your mind that the disease causes, and takes
Hmm.
quite a
Hmm. Hmm.
while to fix.
Josh, I myself into meditation from last 1 year, and like in my experience, what I realized, it's all about basically diverting your mind from bad habits to good habits, and getting addicted to good habits, and then your bad habits will naturally, like, you will definitely get rid of the bad habits once you form good habits. So I do agree with you with every single word of yours, that it's all about forming good habits and getting stick to them, and we can divert our mind into anything.
Absolutely.
The choice. So Josh, I want to ask you that about your book.
Yep.
uh, in, you have written your first book in 2018, and it was about the addiction nobody will talk about, how I let my pornography addiction hurt people and destroy my relationship. So in that book you have described about your, like, the experience you had till
Yeah,
now,
that was really
pornography.
like my autobiography. I really look at the
Hmm.
last
Yeah.
5 years of my life before the police showed up at my door. I look at the last
Hmm.
5 years of how I started going downhill, how it became such a critical addiction. And I go back and I do
Hmm.
look at things that happened when I was young, and I put the
Hmm.
pieces together for people, and just kind of tell my personal story in a way that the average person can understand.
Hmm. So, like, if a young reader is reading that book, what do you think? What are the benefits he or she will get after that book, even if she is not porn
Well,
addict?
I think that they're going to learn again, with some of the stereotypes that come up with porn addiction, I think they're going to recognize that my days were not 24/7 porn. My porn was used in a very specific manner, and
Hmm.
I was still able to keep a life going, but I was hiding a lot. And it's one of those things where it's almost like a look behind the curtain or a look
Hmm.
inside my mind. So, and I think people who know me, a lot of them found it interesting
Hmm.
because they recognized different times of my life and different instances
Hmm.
or incidents that I talked about. And they're like, oh my God, when you were giving this speech, you were actually completely drunk. And it was like, yes, I was drunk when I gave
Hmm.
that speech. And I
Hmm.
was drunk because I was scared to death of giving it. And, but nobody recognized that because I was a decent speaker. And so there's a lot of that
Hmm.
in the book. I think people will put a human face on addiction if they
Hmm.
haven't already done that. It's like I said, it's the story of the rise and fall of my magazine and the rise and fall of my addiction. And it just
Hmm.
kind of looks at how the the whole thing just fell to pieces. And I think that, you can watch a movie, but a movie takes only 2 hours and it covers so much
Hmm.
time
Agree.
quickly. I think that there's a lot of
Hmm.
nuance and subtlety in the book where you can see the little building blocks one after another. And you can see that
Hmm.
I'm on this trajectory downward, even though I couldn't see it. I connect all the dots for people so they can see the
Hmm. Hmm.
trajectory. So hopefully, if they're in my position, they can recognize it. Or if they're not an addict, they can at least pick up some of the pieces so they can learn in other people or in case they develop
Hmm.
these problems later in life.
Again, Josh, like there are very, very few people like you who are ready to share their experiences, which people are not comfortable to talk about. And just for the listeners, I want to tell that Josh book is present on Amazon, and we can buy it from there. And also, it is available on Kindle.
Yep.
So, so Josh, I want to ask you about your website, that is recoveringpornaddict.com. So, can you tell a little bit information about that website? What is
Yeah,
it
I
about?
tried
And
to create a website that whether you are an addict, the partner or
hmm.
family member of an addict, or just somebody who's interested could come and learn. I write one or two
Hmm.
articles every week about either recovery, about addiction, or about the state of the world. For instance, this
Hmm.
week I wrote about OnlyFans and how it's absolutely exploding across the world, and it's the fastest growing pornographic website. But most people have never even heard of it. It's just blowing up that fast, especially among the young people. Young people know what
Yes,
OnlyFans
young
is.
people.
Old people don't know what OnlyFans is.
All young.
And
Hmm.
so I also have a page of resources. If you think you're an addict,
Hmm.
I have the different 12-step groups or inpatient rehabs or intensive outpatient. I talk about the different ways you can get help.
Hmm.
I have links to different kinds
Hmm.
of help. I also have all of my interviews I've done on shows like this and other places. And you will also see a link to my coaching and my advising side of things, where if I look at it as a place kind of halfway between
Hmm.
doing nothing and going to therapy. A lot of
Hmm.
guys, a
Hmm.
lot of their partners, a lot of them first come to me before they go to therapy just so they can talk about it, because so many guys with porn addiction
Hmm.
have never been able to talk about it with anyone. And when I
Hmm.
sit down and talk
Hmm.
to these guys on a Zoom call, you can just see in their face so much relief
Hmm.
that I'm not judging them. I'm not making them feel embarrassed.
Hmm.
I've seen everything out there. I'm not going to judge you for what you looked at. I
Hmm.
know you're not looking at it because, you think it's
Hmm.
awesome. You're looking at it because you're sick and you need to get
Hmm.
well. And and I'll tell my story and I'll talk about
Hmm.
recovery. And these guys feel so much better knowing they're not alone in the world after
Hmm.
talking to me.
Yes.
So that's part of my website. Plenty of other goodies
Hmm.
there. Anybody who's interested, like you mentioned, and you can reach me that way very easily too. It is recoveringpornaddict.com. And some of my other books are for sale up there too.
I will definitely link all about your books and on your website in the description of my
I
video.
very much appreciate that.
So John, like, just you have told me that there are many people just by talking with you they feel so much better. So, like, is it necessary to for a addict, porn addict person to go for a recovery, or just by like having a chat with someone we can also eradicate this
I
addiction?
think that if you have a chat with someone like me, I can help you
Hmm.
better understand what's really going on. If I can, if we can talk about, I can talk about the abuse that happened when I was a kid. And
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
so many porn addicts have been abused, I'm talking about it. They
Hmm.
feel safe to talk about it. One of the most important things, if you're going to talk about something like this, is creating a safe space. And yeah, maybe these people won't have to go to therapy, won't have to go to rehab. Maybe
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
they're not a critical addict, if they're in just the early stages or the ongoing stages, they may not need help. I may be all they need as far as talking and just going back
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
forth and creating a plan to get better. Um, but I stress I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a guy who went through what they went through. And there were a lot of
Hmm.
people who need more care than I can offer,
Hmm.
but I can make them feel better about that care.
Better.
Those guys who were
Hmm.
afraid to go talk to a therapist or afraid to go to a rehab center for a month, I can talk to them about it and share my stories and make them realize it's the
Hmm.
best decision they could make. And that's
Hmm.
really, I look at my role is by helping them
Hmm.
figure out how to get into recovery, how to start
Hmm.
recovery. And really, ultimately, it's up to them. It's up to the addict if they're
Hmm.
going to get
Hmm.
better.
Hmm.
I can't
Agree.
control the addict. The wife or the girlfriend can't
Hmm.
control the addict. The mother, the son, nobody can control the addict except themselves. And I look at it as my job is
Hmm.
to kind of be a source of information,
S-
and a little
Hmm.
bit of a cheerleader, and just to make them feel safe and better that
Hmm.
I am
Hmm. Hmm.
somebody that I can keep their secrets. I'm not going to judge them on what they've done.
Hmm.
And once they realize I'm not going to judge them, I can tell them their therapist isn't going to judge them. Their therapist has heard everything. I'm
Hmm.
not a
Hmm. Hmm.
special, unique snowflake as a porn addict. My story is just like everybody else's for the most part.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
just rare in that I tell it. People who don't
Yes.
want to share their
Hmm.
story, their stories are very similar. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I do this, is to let everybody know, hey, our stories are similar. We're
Hmm.
all kind of the same. We're all in this together. We don't have to feel shame. We don't have to feel
Hmm.
embarrassment, but we need to try to get ourselves better.
Yep, do agree with you. It's the like no matter who is gonna support you, if you don't have that spark from inside, you need to change. That it is not possible for you to change.
Absolutely. I met
So,
people who had been to rehab 10 times. I met people who'd been to rehab
hmm.
15, 16 times. And I could look at them and say, they're not going to do it because they didn't want to do
Hmm.
it. They didn't really truly want. They were at rehab because their parents wanted them there, or their wife told them they had to go, or they were
Hmm.
going there because they wanted to be a better father for their kids, but they didn't care about being a better person for themselves. And ultimately,
Hmm.
you have to care about yourself and you have to care about your
Hmm.
health more than anything before you're going to
Hmm.
get better.
So John, like coming with the last question, I
Sure.
guess. So, I want to like I don't know that whenever Indian education system will have the sex education in their curriculum. So, being a parent, what you think that parents should approach their child to talk about such
I think
subjects?
that you need to look at the child as an individual, look at what their age
Hmm.
is, and make it appropriate. You can tell a 6-year-old child, listen, if you happen to be on the computer or you are with a little friend and you see a picture of
Hmm.
somebody who's naked, or two grown-ups who are naked,
Hmm.
come tell
Hmm.
me, because kids shouldn't look at that. That's not for kids, that's for adults. And you can let that go. And then, when they're 9 or 10 years old, you can say things like, don't ever let anybody take any pictures of you without your clothes on. And you don't ever take
Hmm.
pictures of anybody else without their clothes on. And nothing like that. And then once they're
Hmm.
13, 14 years old and they're into puberty, you can start to make it a
Hmm.
little bit more I don't
Hmm.
want to say graphic, but a little bit more sexually explicit, because they're old enough to understand it at that point. And you can talk about how, for boys, a lot of teenage boys, 19, 20 years old, they actually have problems with erections because they've used so much
Hmm.
pornography in their time. And I think if you tell 14-year-old boys that 5 solid years of porn abuse might actually, make it hard for them to have sex with a normal girl,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
will
Hmm.
scare
Hmm.
them and that will make them not want to do it because 14-year-old boys want to have girlfriends. 14-year-old boys don't
Hmm.
want to
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
porn addicts. They want to have girlfriends. So if
Hmm.
we let them know that their
Hmm.
behavior could actually lead to sexual dysfunction,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
that's a big, big, I don't know, not red flag, or it's
Difference.
it's going to be
Hmm.
it would make a big difference in how these
Hmm.
guys view porn. We need to make them
Hmm.
understand that it can be
Understand.
unhealthy. It can have a bad effect on them. And you give them this information, you give them the education, and you hope they make good decisions. Because that's all you can do as
Hmm.
a parent. But if you don't give them the information, how can you expect them to make good decisions?
Hmm. 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 Do agree with you. In India, there are many creators coming up with like there is a movement going on in India, especially in youth, and that is the No Fap Challenge, in which many creators are motivating youth to protect their semen and divert like protect that energy into something meaningful. So, what do you think about it? That do we get benefit from it from such if we protect
I
our
I
energy
believe
and
that something like the no fap movement can help. I
no fap from
believe
it?
though that can help people who are recreational users. If you
Hmm.
look at porn once or twice a week, I think that it can help you with that. If you're an actual addict, stopping masturbation, stopping ejaculation doesn't do anything to your trauma. It doesn't do anything
Hmm.
to, the abuse that you dealt with. It doesn't help you
Hmm.
get
Hmm.
through
Hmm.
it. And that's
Hmm.
the one thing that I always warn people. If you're truly an addict, no fap isn't going to do anything for you because you're not
Hmm.
dealing with the real problem. No fap
Problem.
is like putting a band-aid on a wound. And what you need to do is you need to deal with the wound. You have to clean it out. You have to dress
Hmm.
it. You can't just put a band aid over it. And no fap is a band aid. For people who are addicts, no fap will never truly work. If it works for you because you're a recreational user or porn is just a bad habit, fantastic. I'm glad. But
Hmm.
people also have to remember no fap originated because of an episode of Seinfeld 25 years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this wonderful movement
Hmm.
is from a sitcom. And it was from a couple guys
Hmm.
on Reddit who decided to try to do the challenge of the sitcom, which was a no masturbation challenge. And that's what, no fap became. And I think if it helps you to get healthier, fantastic, but it's not going to deal with the underlying problems of addiction.
So, Josh, like, thank you so much. I really want to, from the bottom of my, thank you so much. And after having a conversation with you, one thing I realized is that you are not that guy who is after money, who is after fame and all this kind of stuff. You're after real change, and like your intentions are very real. That's what I've realized after having conversation. It is really honored for me to have you on the show, and I do believe that from our conversation we can make a small difference in among Indian
I
youth.
really hope so because this is a worldwide problem. And that's why I love talking. I do a
Hmm.
lot of American interviews, but I love talking to
Hmm.
people in Asia and Europe and Australia, other parts of the world, because it really is something that's international because the internet is international. And this is a problem we all face as the human race. This isn't about US versus
Hmm.
Russia or China versus Korea or anything like that. This isn't about two
Hmm.
warring
Hmm.
countries. This is about an international health crisis that we are
International health
going to be
crisis.
facing very soon if we don't start dealing with it correctly.
Thank you so much, Josh, for guiding me as a personally. I'm myself a student, so I really want to thank you for all this, for all the effort you are doing to make a small difference in this world, and also to the listeners, I will link all the Josh website and his book in the link in the description, and you can contact Josh on his website. And again, from the bottom of my heart, a big namaste to you, and Thank you so much for giving your precious time and guiding us on this subject.
And
Thank you so
thank you
much.
for giving me the time. I appreciate it.
Josh, you have been with many interviews. Like, do you want to give me any recommendation as an interview?
Uh, you're very good at asking questions. You already always have a question ready. I appreciate that. Um, not really. You're very good. You're very good at continue, and you're keeping it a conversation too. I like it when
Hmm.
you share things about what's going on in your life or what's going on in your home
Hmm.
country, because it needs to stay a conversation. That's important, and it's clear you did research. Even if you only
Hmm.
spend 10 minutes on my website, it's clear you spent 10 minutes there, and that's important. So many people who are podcast hosts, a lot of podcast hosts ask me to send them questions, and I
Oh.
respond to them, no, no, I'm not doing that. You can make them up, you can research them, whatever I want, but i'm
Hmm.
not i'm not doing your interview for you. There are a lot of
Hmm.
lazy podcast hosts out there. There are a lot of podcast hosts that don't show up when they say they're going to,
Hmm.
and they don't care, and that's really a pain to deal with. So I would give you an absolute
Hmm.
A+ for everything, for from dealing with you
Thank you so
to
much.
your interview style. I thought it went very well.
Thank you so much. It really means the world to me. I will definitely send you the video and the podcast link when it's online.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you so
All
much.
right, time for my bedtime.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night from
All
India.
right, good morning from America.
Morning. Good morning.
Bye now.
Goodbye. Bye. Bye.